Now, Saturn for a Leo ascendant. What are the houses that Saturn rules for Leo? Rules over the 6th and also the 7th houses. And what are these houses? The 6th house, as we've discussed, is a house that deals with enemies, competitors, routine, discipline, hardship, the day-to-day. It's also a house of disease. It's a house of improvement, of working hard to improve things. The 7th house is a house of other people, trade, exchange. It's a financial house. It's a house of pleasure, house of sexuality, house of our partnerships. Leos often have difficulties. Now, there is that rule that you've heard. Leos often have difficulties with these things that we just listed about 7th house matters because Saturn also rules the 6th. And this brings up a good point about those rules that you've heard about yogas, which we cover very in depth in the astrological apprenticeship course in class 3 of year 2, specifically on these yogas. There's the idea that a cruel planet, Saturn is a cruel planet, owning an angle tends to make that planet work better. Now, generally, we can think about that as something to consider, because if a cruel planet owns an angle, then we know that they're going to be able to take effective action in life to overcome difficulties. However, that rule typically only works like that if the other house the planet rules is not a difficult house. So we see for a Leo ascendant, Saturn ruling an angle, the 7th house, does not necessarily make it better, because the other house that it rules is a 6th house, a house of suffering and difficulty. So this is one of the reasons why Leos often have difficulty in relationships, difficulty with spouses, difficulty with partnerships. We can often think about, oh, it's the sun, they want to shine, they want everyone to look at them, and they're very self-absorbed. Well, remember, the generalities and stereotypes of the ascendant don't come just by the fact that it's a sun-ruled sign and it's sign number 5. It's because of how all the other houses are owned, the planets that own the other houses around that ascendant. And so for a Leo, why is it that they have such difficulty in relationships? It's not because they're so egotistical. That can play a role, assuming there's difficulties with the sun, but it's not a given. The reason is because the 7th house Lord Saturn is Saturn, number 1, and number 2, it also rules the 6th house. So a person always feels sometimes in competition with their partner. They feel like they have to improve their partner. And what's the quickest way to ruin your relationship? One of the quickest ways to ruin your relationship is to think you know what's best for your partner, and if they just listen to what you said, you could fix them, and everything in the relationship and everything in your partner's life and everything in your life would be great if they just listen to you. That's the big problem that Leos have, and that's why they're often considered to be self-absorbed, because they can have this idea. But it comes from the fact that really deep down inside, since Saturn rules the 6th and the 7th, they do truly want to improve their relationship, 6th house things. But sometimes it comes out as criticism or nagging, because maybe other things in their chart don't give them the diplomacy or tact, or maybe it doesn't give them the wisdom to see that, hey, this actually isn't a problem, because that's a big thing in relationships, when you nitpick about things that aren't problems just because of how you were raised and you don't necessarily see a different perspective. But this is where it comes from. It is actually better if a Leo ascendant is in service to their partner and treats their partner as though the Leo is a servant to the partner. Now, we're not saying that we grovel and we beg and we get into any kind of domination types of things, unless you're into that, unless both of you are into that, I suppose. But it means that you treat your partner and your spouse as though whatever you have to offer, you do it for them. You ask what they need. What do they want? And you channel that 6th house rulership of the 7th into a sense of service to the other, the 7th house lordship. rather than trying to impose your own ideas onto them, which creates that conflict, that sixth house conflict. That's why Leos, I don't know, I would assume that they probably have higher divorce rates than other ascendants. It would be interesting if we could test that. Or more difficulties within their relationships, although that's harder to test because sometimes it's difficult for us to really assess when there's a problem, especially when we're caught up in it. But let's think about the fact that Saturn is exalted in the third house for a Leo ascendant, and it's also debilitated in the ninth house for a Leo ascendant. Now, let's look at the debilitation first. On one level, sixth house lordship deals with servants, people that serve us, that are under us, or people that we have to take care of and provide for, which are often your servants. You have to take care of your servants, otherwise they're not going to do a very good job for you. The seventh house deals with other people, other people's ideals. When we take that sixth and seventh lordship and debilitate it in the ninth is the person's dharma and purpose and direction in life. One of the biggest difficulties a Leo has is getting driven off course by attachments to other people, rather than staying true to what one knows is the truth. Again, it's different for all of us, so we're not looking for any kind of absolute truth here because it's going to be different for everybody. But they sacrifice their own life path as a Leo ascendant, their own ability to direct their life well intelligently as the sun wants them to, because they're too caught up, they're too attached to trying to please or make everyone else happy around them. Everyone else, and that's the key, it's everyone. Because as we saw in previous videos, the idea of Leo ascendant is to be a king who understands which sacrifices need to be made, and some people are going to get the benefit of the sacrifice, and some people are going to be sacrificed. And in an effective kingdom, that's just what happens. Although hopefully people take turns with that. So when a Leo ascendant gets derailed by worrying without wisdom, or fretting, wasting their energy and their vitality, rather than making the hard decisions when they need to be made, because Saturn is that planet that allows you to endure. The ninth house is a house that deals with purpose and dharma and philosophy, and sometimes we have to endure great difficulties to see our philosophies through to the end. And then after we do that, if we're successful, then everyone in our care, everyone in our kingdom says, those sacrifices were horrible. We had no idea why we should have made those sacrifices, but we trusted you and we saw that you led us correctly. But when Saturn is debilitated in that ninth house, the person can't separate that. They can't get the detachment to move forward to support whatever truth needs to be supported for them. We take that Saturn and we exalt it in the third house. The third house can deal with the things that we're interested in, our mind, our hobbies, trial and error. Because remember, the third house is related to Gemini, which is very specifically a sign of thinking things through, experimentation, trial and error. The Leo ascendant has to have ice cold veins, if you will, to be able to try to lead the people that they're responsible for, because there will be things that they don't know. There's no givens. There's no 100% certainties. They're going to have to try things and make mistakes. And when you put that Saturn in the third house, that gives them the endurance, the courage, the ability to admit when they're wrong, the ability to make mistakes, but also the ability to get back up, endure, and try again, for the sake of others, for the sake of those people that are ruled over by sixth house things and by seventh house things. One of the other difficulties with Leo having that exalted Saturn, the third house, is the third is the eighth from the eighth house. They call it Bhavat Bhavam. And Saturn, many people don't think about Saturn as a planet of sexuality, but it actually is. Not the luxurious, hyper real, pornographic, artsy stuff that everyone dreams about. but like just sex, really. Like Saturn represents natural animalistic drives. And so when you take that seventh lord and you stick it in the third exalted, that's one of the reasons why many leaders, many politicians, many rulers can have a very animalistic, intense sex drive because of that Saturn, how it functions in that third house, the eighth from the eighth, and Saturn's natural indications around sexuality. So when people talk about things like scandals around people in power, it never surprises me. I mean, it seems like it's been going on that way for thousands of years. If you're in power, there's going to be something like that going on. The issue is, does it become a drama? Is your Jupiter not well situated, the eighth house lord not well situated, so it becomes a drama? Or does it just become part of life? Just as an acceptance of that's what happens when you're in those kinds of roles. Now, should it be that way? I don't know. I don't really think so. Maybe it's just the time period we're in. But when you think about that seventh and sixth lordship in the third, and you kind of do all the bavat bavam, it's not a surprise when those things come up. So overall, Saturn is very much so, more of a difficult planet for a Leo ascendant. It requires a lot more responsibility, a lot more time and attention. And it can be very difficult to manage, especially when you're trying to do good for everybody, but you still have to make sacrifices for the good of the all. And that's often the crux of the suffering that a Leo ascendant has to go through. And it's their place in life to eventually make peace with that and move on and simply do their best.